Hi everybody, I'm Adam Steele for Hot Pole Studios, and today's conversation is the SM58 microphone sucks. Before you all go typing in the comments going, oh, you know nothing, what do you know? I'm just making a point of conversation here, and there is going to be some merit to it, there's going to be some that's just personal opinion, it's all fine. So where to begin, because it's quite an incendiary opinion to have, it's something that I've thought for a long time, but there's definite kind of roots to why I think the SM58 isn't a particularly good microphone. At least, it's not a very good microphone in the context that it's most often used in this modern era. I don't even have an SM58 to hand. I've got one somewhere, and I paid £5 for it at a car boot sale, and yes, it is a genuine one. And it's in my spare microphones bag, which is in with all my live equipment. It's a spare for me. That's how I see it. It's kind of a just in case. Now, the SM58 and its brother, the SM57, which I have here, were designed many years ago. Of course, the SM series coming from the old Shure Unidyne microphone range, and the capsules and design in these haven't really changed since at least the 70s, if not the 60s. And was it the SM57 or the SM58 was the official microphone of the President of the USA. At the time, yes, these things were groundbreaking because they were designed not to have to use thousands of dollars or pounds worth of equipment to get this cardioid thing going on, which is to have a single microphone element that could reject sound from the back and some from the sides, so you could really crank it up without feedback. And at the time, they were great, and I get that, and that was brilliant back then. So I think getting straight to the point that I'm trying to make is that was then and this is now. What you kind of have to understand is that when these things were designed, they were pushing the limits of the technology of the time, and the question was, what can we make that will provide the most clear gain before feedback? And that's where those microphones came in. The 58 had the grill, the 57 didn't, and the sound of the 57 became quite well matched with the sound of guitars, especially distorted guitars. It seems to have become the thing. And in the studio, I use a 57 quite often on a guitar cabinet because it has a particular tone that can be quite pleasing, although I do use alternatives quite a lot of the time. I'm not the biggest fan of the 57 in terms of guitar tone, but quite often it just works. The 58, however, is the one that I have a large problem with, and the perfect example is a conversation that I had just this week. I was doing live sound for a relatively small venue, and one of the guys came in and started setting up and put an SM58 on the mic stand as I was about to put an alternative mic in there. And it was a bit of friendly banter to begin with, oh, not an SM58 again. And then he starts saying, well, what's wrong with that? It suits my voice, blah, blah, blah. And working in live sound for quite a while, there are some issues with the SM58 as it stands. It can sound relatively muddy, and you don't get a huge amount of gain before feedback compared to our older systems. It can be quite difficult to work with compared to some more modern designs. And so we got into this conversation about, yes, but the SM58 was good at the time. This guy was really digging his heels in, and what he said that really stuck with me is, I use it because that's what everybody uses. That stuck with me, and that went, hang on a minute. You use this thing because that's what everybody else uses. That's not a good thing. You're doing what everybody else does because you've not stopped and thought for a single second about what the implications are. Now, here's the thing. From your voice out to a live venue, there is the microphone, obviously the cables, then there's the mixing desk, then there's the actual power amps and speakers. Now, power amps have come on leaps and bounds since these things were designed. Speakers have come on even further, that they have very high power handling, very high frequency range. You have systems that usually have dedicated subs. You've got loads of line arrays. You've got tweeters that can go up to 20 kilohertz. Quite often you've got very high powered monitor wedges that are very clear and have a lot of high end that come straight back at the microphone. That's all completely different to when the SM58 was designed. The foldback in the monitoring never used to have high end as far as I remember. I have a vintage PA system in my live room where the two speakers that would be in one of those, it was a 2x12 with a tweeter, those speakers were exactly the same as you would find in a guitar cabinet. I'm not kidding, they were Celestion G12H's 30 watt speakers, which meant this was a 60 watt per side PA system, plus tops, which might not have had very much wattage at all. And those tops were not very clear, they had some horrible resonances in. And so the mixing desk would probably not have been driven very hard. You wouldn't have got a large amount of volume out of these. Not a lot of high end, not a lot of low end. And so you made do with what you had. And at the time, cool, I guess. I mean, the mixing desks would probably saturate in such a way that things sounded relatively pleasing. Although I'm sure a lot of that is wrapped in nostalgia, that the PA system definitely couldn't keep up very well. Even when I was younger in the early 90s, I remember going to small shows and knowing that the sound was terrible. It was only the bigger shows even then where they could afford the big full range systems where the sound was really something. So that's the thing, everything has changed and come a long way apart from the SM57 and 58, which people are digging their heels in and quite often making life difficult for the rest of us. And it's not as if there aren't affordable alternatives, even from Shure. Shure themselves make the Beta range. The Beta 58A is a great example of a modern vocal mic. I'm not particularly keen on the sound of a 58A, but that's personal preference, and if someone brings them in, I'm okay with it because they have much higher gain before feedback. They have a different pickup pattern, which means that they're usually, I think it's supercardioid, so they don't pick up very much. There are so many alternatives out there in the same price range, it's not even a case of price. And durability is not an issue anymore because manufacturing tolerances have been so good for so long that that's not been an issue either. And then, okay, so the microphones that I use, if I plug an SM58 into a system with the EQ absolutely level on a desk, I tend to find that when I'm close up, which is where most people use them now, about here, it's muddy. It does cause feedback because I try and push any kind of frequencies out and it just starts to resonant peak, howl at me. What alternatives are there? So let's quickly mention the SM57. There's an alternative that I use quite a lot, which is an Audix i5. This thing is great and I use this on snares all the time because it's brighter, it's more focused, it's more transient. Also sounds more naturally like the snare drum and cancels out the other sound of the other drums. So I use that on drums all the time. Guitar cabinets, I tend not to actually use any mics at all. I try and use something like a load box with cabinet emulation in, even if I'm not using any load attenuation. If they're using a reasonable size amp, I will still use the modeling on these for the microphones, or use something like a Torpedo Cab M, which I have knocking around here somewhere. This thing's fantastic, and I use this even in conjunction with real amps a lot of the time. Bass players, I tend to use a DI from their amp anyway. If they've got a nice amp and nice preamp setup, that fits the bill perfectly well. In a small venue, quite often most of the sound is coming from the guitar amp itself. If not, then I might use 57s maybe, but they won't be doing the bulk of the reinforcement because the amps themselves are doing it. And when it's a big show, I'll use something like a Sennheiser 609 because they've got a more flat frequency response. You know, one of these that doesn't stick out that far from the guitar cabinet, so when the guitarist walks past it, they don't knock it and put it out of position. I see a lot of guys hanging these off the cables, which isn't ideal, but you can do it, but it's flush with the front of the guitar cabinet. Or I see guys now either using ribbons like a Royal 121, which has a really nice sound, or they'll use moderately priced condenser mics because they give you a much more natural guitar sound, which through front of house is what they want. It's not the same as a studio environment where colour and flavour and character can be really quite a nice thing. Live, that's often not what they want. Now, the 58, what would I use instead of that? I used to use Sennheiser's Evolution series of mics. I usually find they're quite bright and airy. But quite often, in fact, whenever I'm using things on my own voice, for a long time I used an SE Electronics V7. That thing rejected the outside world like nobody's business. It was a clear sounding mic, and it meant we could really push the gain and have any sort of EQ tweaks we wanted without causing any extra problems. Recently I've switched to a Sontronic Solo because this is a very similar thing. It's got a super cardioid pickup pattern. It's nice and big and chunky. It's got quite a pronounced mid-range, but it's not got that muffled 500 hertz kind of thing going on. It's really quite clear. You can really push the gain on it, even near monitors, and unless you're pointing it directly at a monitor, which is a stupid thing to do in the first place, it won't start squealing feedback. These things and so many other brands are so much better, and it's funny that Shure have made better microphones that aren't in astronomical price range. So Shure are never going to stop making the SM58 because it sells so many, but guys, if you do live sound, don't get a 58 unless you plan on using it as a baseball bat. Get something else like the examples that I mentioned because your sound guy will thank you. You'll be clearer out front, people will be able to hear exactly what you're singing. I mean, maybe you don't want that, but that's your issue. But yeah, if you want the best of the best for live sound, it doesn't have to be expensive and it doesn't have to be an SM58. Hope you've enjoyed my little rant here because yes, I appreciate that it is a bit of a rant and that a lot of people aren't going to change, but hopefully this will make you consider at least something else. It's meant to be a bit of an educational kind of rant. I'll leave some links in the description to some of the alternative microphones and hopefully you'll have a look at them, check them out and see what they can do for you. Thank you everybody for watching. If you found this useful, consider supporting us on Patreon because that's something that really helps us out to make more of these kind of videos. And thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video. See you later. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next video.